The government says it's confident that children and teachers will be safe under its plans for schools in England to open to more pupils next month. The Cabinet Office Minister Michael Gove said that while it was impossible to completely eliminate the risk of contracting coronavirus, it was extremely unlikely that a school would be the source of an outbreak. It comes as the number of coronavirus deaths reported for the last 24 hours dropped to 170. That's the lowest since the day after lockdown began, though there is generally a lag at the weekends in the recording of deaths. The total number of people who've died in the UK after testing positive for the virus is now 34,636. Our first report this evening is from our chief political correspondent, Vicki.
Could this be what primary schools in England look like in a fortnight's time? In Denmark, pupils are put into small groups with one teacher and kept apart. It's a model the government's suggesting here, but many teachers and parents want to know whether it's safe.
None of us can guarantee that anyone will be entirely free unless effectively they're perpetually imprisoned in their own home. And therefore, what we need to do is to make sure that people are as safe as possible. And in any widespread understanding of the word, schooling for a limited number of children with social distancing is a safe environment.
But some councils, like Liverpool and Hartlepool, say early June is too soon to reopen the gates. Labour wants more information.
What Gavin needs to do, the Education Secretary, is publish the science to why they're making the decision they're making now and ensure that there is the testing and tracing, which he promised yesterday that on the 1st of June that will be available. But at the moment, we've not seen any evidence that they can provide that. They haven't got the staff in place that they said they needed to have the tracing. So testing and tracing and isolation is really important to tracking the virus.
Schools in Wales won't reopen on June the 1st and may not restart at all before the summer in Scotland or Northern Ireland. Some parents think England should take the same approach. Valerie Brooker lives in Surrey and has 2 daughters. She thinks it's too soon to go back to school.
My youngest, Bronwyn, she has asthma. She's on 2 inhalers. Charlotte, she has full-on learning difficulties and she has had pneumonia when she was 5 years old. I don't want her getting a second bout of pneumonia. It's just not viable. I don't want Bronwyn unknowingly coming home and passing the virus. She might be a carrier.
Children rarely become seriously ill from coronavirus. Less is known about how they might transmit it. Teaching unions have quizzed government scientists and some are reassured.
Critically, are teachers and other staff in schools at greater risk than if they were returning to other professions? And that was the key bit of information. They're not at greater risk as teachers and other people in schools. And for me, that was a very significant moment in allowing us to be able to say, let's start planning even more carefully to open our schools, which are already open, to more pupils and more students.
It will be a huge logistical challenge, but the government believes that schools can be made extremely safe. And with scientists warning that we could be living with this virus for a long time, they think it would be very damaging to keep children out of the classroom indefinitely. Vicki Young, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as you heard their minister say, their plans to reopen schools in England will be guided by the best scientific advice. But what exactly does the science tell us about children and the coronavirus? Our health correspondent Dominic Hughes has been exploring the evidence.
The arguments over when or even whether schools in England should reopen before the summer come down to the safety of staff and pupils, how the virus behaves in children and the extent to which they could pass it on to adults. So, what does the science tell us?
We do know that children do become infected, and we measured the amount of virus in their nasal samples, and that looks pretty similar to adults. What we don't know is whether these children then are able to pass on to other adults or to other children.
Is that where the argument lies, do you think?
Definitely. So we need to see evidence that the children pass on to other people. And we can do that through our contact tracing type approaches, where we can follow the chain of infection and see whether children are part of that.
The other important question is, what is the risk posed to adults, both the teachers the children will see at school and the ones they live with at home? Well, children seem to be as likely as adults to get infected, and yet they seem to also suffer fewer symptoms for a shorter period of time and seem to infect fewer people as a result. But the truth is it's early days and we simply don't know for sure. Scientists say they need much more data. Some countries, such as Germany and Denmark, are phasing the reopening of schools with social distancing in place. But students in Italy won't resume their studies until September. Other countries never shut schools in the first place. So what lessons can we learn?
What we have seen in countries where schools have remained open is that there have not been big outbreaks in schools. And where there have been, it's been associated with events, where a lot of people gather, not in regular classrooms. And it's often been associated with an adult who's had the infection and who spread it.
As with so many aspects of the coronavirus, the scientific evidence is still emerging. In the end, it becomes a question of balancing risk, because not sending children to school can also have a damaging effect on their health. Dominic, Hughes, BBC News.
Let's join our education correspondent Elaine Dunkley now, who's in Salford. Given the clash between the government and the teaching unions over this, Elaine, any idea how soon it can be resolved?
Well, it's been a week of rows and, of course, we're getting closer to the 1st of June, from which point on the government wants schools to reopen for children in reception, Year 1 and Year 6. Now, the government has said it is scientifically safe for schools to reopen, but this week the British Medical Association backed the concerns of teaching unions over how they'll manage the risks of children catching and spreading coronavirus to teachers and their families. Now, there's going to be another significant review on May the 28th. But let's not forget there's a whole host of other issues here. While schools have remained open to the children of key workers and those children deemed vulnerable, the vast majority of children haven't been back to school since March the 20th and are unlikely to be in a classroom until September. Now, the government says it would like children in secondary schools who are taking exams next year to have some time in the classroom before the summer holidays. But the vast majority of children are being taught at home by parents who are also working. So there's huge pressures on family. And what this pandemic has also highlighted is just how vulnerable some children are in terms of poverty, resources at home to learn, and also just how safe home is for them. So there are some big challenges ahead for the government and for schools.
Elaine Dunkley, thank you very much.